Jessica Coleman's phone vibrated against her mahogany desk for the third time in 10 minutes, but she couldn't answer it. Across from her, Claire Martinez was dissolving into tears, clutching a tissue box while describing how her husband never listened to her anymore. "He just sits there watching sports. Dr. Coleman. It's like I don't even exist." Jessica nodded sympathetically, her trained therapist voice smooth and reassuring. "Claire, when we constantly criticize our partners, they naturally withdraw as a form of self-protection. Have you considered that your approach might be pushing him away?" The irony was lost on Jessica as her phone buzzed again with what she knew were increasingly frustrated messages from Ryan about her running late once more. The morning had started like every other morning in the Coleman household in suburban Denver. Jessica's eyes had opened at exactly 6:15, and before her feet even touched the hardwood floor, her mental checklist was already running. Ryan's coffee cup sat abandoned on the granite countertop, leaving a ring she'd have to clean later. His gym bag was sprawled by the front door instead of hung on the designated hook. The newspaper lay scattered across the kitchen table rather than neatly folded. "Honestly," she muttered under her breath, collecting his coffee cup with the efficiency of someone who'd given up expecting better. "How hard is it to put things where they belong?" Ryan emerged from their bedroom wearing a wrinkled polo shirt, and Jessica's first instinct was to suggest he iron it. Her disapproving glance said everything. "Morning, Jess," he said, grabbing an apple from the bowl. "Tonight, we're supposed to have dinner at 7. Jessica's jaw tightened. They'd discussed this twice already, and somehow Ryan had the time wrong again. "It's 7:30, Ryan." The slight edge in her voice made him pause mid-bite. "Right. 7:30. Got it." He kissed her cheek quickly and headed for the garage, leaving Jessica feeling both vindicated and strangely hollow. During her lunch break, Jessica called her sister Michelle. "I swear, Mitch, sometimes I feel like I'm married to a teenager." This morning alone, Ryan left his stuff everywhere, wore a wrinkled shirt to work, and got the dinner time wrong despite us talking about it multiple times. Michelle's familiar sigh came through the phone. Jessica moved on. "And don't get me started on how he loads the dishwasher. I've shown him the efficient way probably 50 times, but does he remember? Of course not." Jessica couldn't see how these daily mental inventories had become her morning ritual. She woke up automatically scanning for evidence of Ryan's inadequacies. In her professional life, she was celebrated for her attention to detail and problem-solving abilities. Insurance companies loved her thorough treatment plans. Colleagues sought her advice on difficult cases. But somewhere along the way, she'd begun treating her marriage like a patient that needed constant diagnosis and correction. Back in her office that afternoon, Jessica listened to Claire describe feeling unappreciated and taken for granted. "Your husband probably doesn't realize how his withdrawal affects you," Jessica explained, leaning forward with practiced empathy. "Men often pull back when they feel criticized or controlled. They interpret constant suggestions as evidence that their wives don't trust their judgment." The words flowed easily from years of training and experience. She recommended Claire try expressing appreciation instead of focusing on problems, suggested she give her husband space to contribute without micromanaging how he did it. As Claire wiped her eyes and thanked Jessica for the breakthrough session, Jessica felt the familiar satisfaction of helping another couple find their way back to each other. She'd built her reputation on saving marriages, on teaching women how to create the loving partnerships they craved. Her waiting room was always full. Her success rate was impressive. Yet as she watched Claire walk out with renewed hope, Jessica's phone buzzed with another message from Ryan. "Running late again? Dinner is at 7:30, remember?" The drive home through Denver traffic gave Jessica time to replay her successful session with Claire. She'd been particularly insightful today about the cycle of criticism and withdrawal. Some women just didn't understand how their helpful suggestions came across as attacks on their husband's competence. It was so obvious when you looked at it objectively. These wives needed to learn that men had fragile egos and required careful handling. Jessica merged onto their street feeling satisfied with her professional expertise, completely unaware that she was about to walk into her own case study. Ryan was exactly where she expected to find him when she opened the front door at 8:15. He sat in his recliner, remote in hand, watching a baseball game with the volume higher than necessary. The dinner dishes sat in the sink, clearly visible from the living room. Jessica set down her purse and briefcase with deliberate precision. "How was your day?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Fine," Ryan replied without looking away from the screen. The single word hung in the air between them like a wall. Jessica walked to the kitchen, surveying the aftermath of Ryan's solo dinner. A plate with sandwich crumbs, an open jar of peanut butter with the lid sitting beside it, and a knife that had dripped jelly onto the counter. The dishwasher sat empty just 3 feet away. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to be helpful rather than critical. "Ryan, since you finished eating, maybe we could get these dishes loaded? It only takes a minute, and tomorrow morning will be so much easier if we stay on top of things." The volume on the television immediately increased. Ryan's thumb pressed the remote button repeatedly, drowning out Jessica's reasonable suggestion with the announcer's play-by-play commentary. She stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, watching her husband's broad shoulders deliberately turned away from her, and for the first time, a disturbing thought crept into her mind. When had offering helpful solutions become something Ryan needed to escape from? This moment illustrates a phenomenon that plagues many intelligent, successful women in their marriages. Professional competence creates dangerous blind spots in intimate relationships. When a woman excels at problem-solving in her career, she naturally applies those same skills at home. But marriage isn't a problem to be solved or a project to be managed. The very traits that make someone an executive or professional can become relationship poison when applied to a spouse. Men don't experience helpful suggestions the way women intend them. Instead, they hear messages about their inadequacy, their failure to meet standards, their inability to handle basic responsibilities without supervision. The more capable and intelligent a woman is professionally, the more likely she is to fall into this trap, because she genuinely believes she's helping. Logic and efficiency aren't the currencies of intimate connection. What feels like caring guidance to her feels like suffocating control to him. 3 days later, Jessica was upstairs folding laundry when she heard Ryan's voice drifting up from the kitchen. He was on the phone, and something in his tone made her pause with a towel halfway to the linen closet. "I don't know, Jake. I honestly don't know how much more I can take." Jessica's hands stilled completely. "She treats me like I'm completely incompetent, like I can't do anything right without her supervision." The words hit Jessica like a physical blow, and she found herself creeping closer to the top of the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I used to think she believed in me, you know? Now I feel like I'm this massive disappointment she's stuck with." Jessica's first instinct was pure defensive rage. How dare he paint her as some kind of monster to his brother? She worked her tail off to keep their household running smoothly while maintaining a demanding career. She was trying to help him, trying to make their life better, more organized, more efficient. If Ryan would just listen to her suggestions instead of getting defensive about everything, they wouldn't have these problems. She gripped the banister until her knuckles went white, mentally preparing the speech she'd give him about how unfair and one-sided his complaints were. But as Ryan continued talking, something in his voice stopped her cold. "I miss the woman I married, Jake. She used to laugh at everything. She'd get excited about the stupidest things. But now she looks at me like I'm this project she's trying to fix." The defeat in his words was unmistakable, and Jessica felt something crack open inside her chest. "I can't even make her coffee in the morning without her telling me I'm doing it wrong. Yesterday she rearranged the groceries I put away because apparently I don't understand proper pantry organization." Jessica sank down onto the top step, the laundry basket forgotten beside her. When had she become the kind of person who rearranged her husband's efforts? Why had helping turned into controlling? The conversation from downstairs faded as Jessica's mind raced backward through time. She remembered their second date, when Ryan had taken her hiking in the foothills outside Denver. She'd worn completely inappropriate shoes and ended up with blisters, but instead of complaining, she'd laughed when he'd offered to carry her piggyback down the mountain. Back then, Ryan used to call her from work just to tell her about things that happened during his day. He'd bring her little surprises, not because she'd asked for them, but because something reminded him of her. She remembered overhearing him at a barbecue early in their marriage, telling his coworkers about her latest promotion. "My wife is brilliant," he'd said with such obvious pride. She could run the whole company if they'd let her. When had he stopped bragging about her? When had he stopped calling with random stories? The realization hit her like ice water. Somewhere between the wedding and now, she'd transformed from the woman who laughed at disasters into someone who saw disasters everywhere that needed preventing. She'd become someone who heard "I love you" and thought, then why don't you show it by doing things correctly? The woman Ryan had fallen in love with wouldn't have cared about pantry organization or coffee-making techniques. She would have been grateful that someone wanted to make her coffee at all. That evening, Jessica decided to clear the air. She found Ryan in his home office, paying bills on his laptop. "Ryan, we need to talk," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. He looked up warily, and she noticed how his shoulders tensed automatically. "I think we've gotten into some bad patterns lately, and I want to fix them." Ryan's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "I've been thinking about how we communicate, and I realize I might come across as critical sometimes." Ryan set down his pen and looked at her directly for the first time in weeks. "Critical sometimes?" His voice was carefully controlled. "Jessica, you critique everything I do. This morning you told me I was brushing my teeth too aggressively. Yesterday you explained the proper way to put ice in a glass. I can't do anything without you having a better method." Jessica felt her defenses rising. "I'm not trying to be critical, Ryan. I'm trying to help. You know I have experience with organization and efficiency from work, and I thought you'd appreciate the input." The words sounded reasonable to her own ears, but Ryan's face was closing off again. "Like when you helped me reorganize my tool shed, without asking, and then left me a color-coded chart explaining your new system? That shed was a disaster, Ryan. You couldn't find anything in there." Jessica could hear her voice getting that patient, explanatory tone she used with difficult clients. "I spent my entire Saturday creating a logical system that would save you time and frustration." Ryan stood up abruptly, pushing back from the desk. "I didn't ask you to fix my shed, Jessica. I knew where everything was. Maybe it looked messy to you, but it worked for me." Jessica felt frustration bubbling up. This was exactly the problem. Ryan couldn't see past his own limited perspective to appreciate the improvements she was offering. "So you'd rather waste time hunting for tools than use an efficient system? You'd rather live in chaos than accept help from someone who knows better?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and she watched Ryan's face transform. "There it is," he said. "Someone who knows better. That's what you really think, isn't it? That you know better than me about everything. How to organize, how to work, how to live." His voice was rising now, months of suppressed frustration pouring out. "Jessica, everything I do is wrong. I can't load the dishwasher without a critique about water efficiency and dish placement. I can't choose a restaurant without a lecture about better options. I can't even exist in my own house without you having suggestions for improvement." Jessica opened her mouth to defend herself, but Ryan wasn't finished. "You want to know what the real problem is? You treat me like I'm some incompetent roommate you're stuck training." His words hung in the air between them, raw and honest, and Jessica realized with sinking horror that she couldn't argue with a single thing he'd said. This reveals the fundamental difference between how men and women experience love and respect in marriage. Women often show love through acts of service and helpful guidance, believing that improving their partner's life demonstrates care. But men interpret constant suggestions and corrections as evidence of disrespect and distrust. When a wife frequently offers better ways to do things, her husband doesn't hear "I love you" enough to help you improve. Instead, he hears "I don't believe you're capable of handling basic tasks without my supervision." This dynamic is particularly destructive because both partners have good intentions. The wife genuinely wants to help and can't understand why her husband gets defensive about receiving useful guidance. The husband feels constantly judged and found wanting, wondering why the woman who once admired him now seems to see him as a project requiring constant correction. The tragedy is that the more unloved a woman feels due to her husband's withdrawal, the more she tries to help and fix, which only increases his sense of being disrespected and incompetent. creating a downward spiral that destroys intimacy from both directions. At 2:17 in the morning, Jessica sat on her living room floor with her laptop, typing search terms she never imagined she'd need. How to stop being a controlling wife. Article after article described behaviors that sounded uncomfortably familiar. Ryan was asleep on the couch again, claiming the late-night baseball game had lulled him to sleep there, but Jessica knew better. He was avoiding their bed, avoiding her. The blue glow of the screen illuminated her face as she scrolled through forums where women described the exact same patterns she'd fallen into. One post made her hands tremble. I woke up one day and realized I'd become my husband's mother instead of his wife, and he was treating me like an annoying parent he couldn't wait to escape from. Jessica's first attempts at change felt like trying to write with her non-dominant hand. Everything felt awkward and unnatural. The next morning, she watched Ryan pour orange juice and splash some on the counter. Her entire body tensed with the urge to grab a paper towel and suggest he pour more slowly next time. Instead, she forced herself to take a sip of coffee and say, "Thanks for making breakfast." The words felt strange in her mouth. Ryan looked up sharply, suspicion flickering across his face. "I didn't make breakfast. I just poured juice." Jessica felt heat creep up her neck. "I know. I just meant, for taking care of yourself. For being responsible." The conversation died an uncomfortable death as Ryan grabbed his keys and left for work without his usual goodbye kiss. The grocery store incident happened on a Thursday afternoon. Jessica had asked Ryan to pick up a few things on his way home, secretly hoping he'd prove her wrong about his shopping abilities. When he returned with name-brand items instead of the store brands she preferred, organic milk instead of regular, and expensive pre-cut vegetables instead of whole ones she could prep herself, every nerve in her body screamed to explain the superior choices. She gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until her knuckles went white. "Thank you for shopping," she managed to say through gritted teeth. "This is perfect." Ryan paused in unpacking the bags, studying her face carefully. "You sure? You look like you're in pain." Jessica forced what she hoped was a smile. "No pain, just grateful." But changing decades-old patterns proved harder than Jessica had anticipated. By Friday evening, she'd slipped back into old habits 3 times, caught herself mid-suggestion twice, and spent most of dinner analyzing Ryan's posture for signs of improvement or regression. He'd started responding to her attempts at appreciation with one-word answers and skeptical looks. "Something's up with you," he said as they loaded the dishwasher together. "You're being weird." Jessica felt her carefully constructed new approach crumbling. "I'm not being weird. I'm being nice." Saturday morning, Jessica found Mrs. Patterson, their 78-year-old neighbor, planting tulip bulbs in her front yard and stopped to chat. "You and Harold seem so happy together," Jessica found herself saying, watching the older woman's face light up. "What's your secret?" Mrs. Patterson sat back on her heels, dirt-stained gloves resting on her knees. "Oh, honey, it took me years to figure out that Harold didn't marry me to be his manager. He married me to be his cheerleader." She chuckled at Jessica's confused expression. "I spent the first decade of our marriage trying to improve that man. Better clothes, better habits, better ways of doing everything. Nearly drove us both crazy." Mrs. Patterson continued planting while she talked. "One day I realized I had 2 choices. I could keep trying to turn Harold into the husband I wanted, or I could appreciate the husband I actually had. Turns out when I stopped trying to fix him, he started trying to please me. Funny how that works." Jessica felt something click into place. But what if he does things inefficiently? What if you know a better way? The older woman's laugh was warm and knowing. "Honey, there's always a better way to do everything. The question is whether being right is more important than being happy." That afternoon, Ryan announced he needed to drive across town to pick up a part for his lawnmower. In the old days, Jessica would have immediately offered to navigate, suggested alternate routes, or pointed out traffic shortcuts. Instead, she surprised them both by saying, "Mind if I come along? I could use the fresh air." Ryan's eyebrows shot up, but he nodded. As they settled into his truck, Jessica physically sat on her hands to keep from reaching for the GPS when Ryan turned left instead of right out of their neighborhood. 10 minutes later, they were hopelessly lost in a subdivision that looked exactly like every other subdivision in suburban Denver. Jessica's internal GPS was screaming turn-by-turn directions, but she bit her tongue so hard she tasted blood. Ryan pulled over to check his phone, muttering under his breath about construction detours. "I think we're supposed to go back to the main road," Jessica offered tentatively. Ryan looked at her with surprise. "Yeah, probably. Thanks." No lecture about checking directions before leaving. No suggestions about using different apps. Just a simple acknowledgement of his mistake and gratitude for her input. As Ryan turned the truck around, something shifted between them. "Remember when we got lost driving to that concert in Boulder?" he asked suddenly. Jessica blinked, caught off guard by the memory. "We ended up at that weird roadside diner with the singing waitress." A smile tugged at the corner of Ryan's mouth. "You ordered that massive piece of pie and couldn't finish it, so you tried to hide it under your napkin when the waitress came back." Jessica felt laughter bubbling up from somewhere she'd forgotten existed. She was so proud of her homemade cherry pie. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. For the first time in months, genuine laughter filled the space between them. Not polite chuckling or forced humor, but the kind of spontaneous joy that had marked their early relationship. When a woman has built her identity around being competent, helpful, and right, stepping back from that role feels like emotional freefall. Every instinct screams against allowing inefficiency, mistakes, or suboptimal choices. The fear is that if she doesn't manage and guide, everything will fall apart. But this fear is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of masculine psychology. Men are wired to solve problems and provide for their families, but they cannot access these instincts when they feel micromanaged and criticized. Respect is oxygen for their souls. When a woman consistently offers suggestions and improvements, her husband hears the message that she doesn't trust his judgment or capabilities. This erodes his confidence and motivation to please her. However, when a wife steps back and allows her husband to handle things his way, even if his methods are different from hers, something magical happens. He begins to step up, take initiative, and actively look for ways to make her happy. The key is understanding that different doesn't mean wrong, and that a man's desire to please his wife is directly proportional to how much he feels she believes in him. The progress Jessica had been making shattered on a Tuesday morning when her mother called to announce she was flying in from Phoenix for a week-long visit. "I'll be there Friday, sweetheart. I can't wait to see how you've decorated the guest room." Jessica's stomach dropped as she surveyed their house through her mother's critical eyes. Dust on the baseboards her mother would definitely notice, the guest bathroom faucet that dripped constantly, Ryan's pile of magazines that had been growing on the coffee table for 2 weeks. Within minutes, Jessica had mentally cataloged 17 things that needed immediate attention before her mother's arrival. Ryan walked into the kitchen to find Jessica frantically scrubbing the inside of the microwave at 7 in the morning. "Mom's coming Friday," she announced without looking up. "We need to get this place in shape. Can you please trim the bushes out front today? And that dripping faucet in the guest bathroom has to be fixed. Also, your magazine pile needs to disappear." The words tumbled out in rapid-fire succession, and she watched Ryan's face transform from sleepy confusion to resigned disappointment. The softness that had been returning to his expression over the past few weeks vanished, like someone had flipped a switch. "Sure, Jessica. I'll add it to my list," Ryan said flatly, pouring his coffee with mechanical precision. Jessica barely registered his tone, already mentally moving through the house room by room. "Oh, and we should probably get those touch-up paint bottles from the garage. There are scuff marks by the front door that she'll definitely see." Ryan nodded wordlessly and left for work without his usual goodbye, but Jessica was too distracted to notice. She spent the day in a cleaning frenzy that felt both familiar and oddly comforting. Taking charge, making lists, ensuring everything met her standards felt like slipping back into a favorite pair of shoes. By Wednesday evening, Ryan was working late again. "Big project at the office," he texted, but Jessica knew better. She'd seen this pattern before, during their worst patches. When home felt like a place where he couldn't do anything right, Ryan found reasons to stay away. Thursday brought another late night, and Jessica realized with growing panic that her week of intensive house preparation had completely undone weeks of careful relationship repair. She'd fallen back into her old role as household manager and critic, and Ryan had responded by emotionally checking out. Friday morning arrived with her mother's flight, and a husband who spoke to her only in polite, distant phrases. "I picked up those paint bottles you wanted," he said, setting them on the kitchen counter. "Anything else before I head to work?" His tone was perfectly courteous and completely cold. Jessica felt something break inside her chest. "Ryan, I know I've been a little intense this week." He paused with his hand on the garage door. "A little intense," he repeated. "Right. Well, I hope the visit goes well." The door closed behind him, not quite a slam, but definitely not gentle. Jessica's mother arrived with her usual whirlwind of opinions and observations. "The house looks lovely, dear, though I noticed that tree in your front yard could use professional trimming." Within an hour, Jessica found herself automatically agreeing and making mental notes about landscaping services. But something felt different this time. Instead of feeling validated by her mother's standards, Jessica felt exhausted. She watched her mother inspect the guest bathroom and comment on the soap dispenser placement, and suddenly saw herself through Ryan's eyes. Was this how she sounded when she offered helpful suggestions about his tool organization or his driving route choices? After her mother's departure on Sunday evening, Jessica stood in their perfectly clean house, looking at the fresh flowers she'd arranged and the magazines she'd organized, and felt completely empty. She'd spent a week turning their home into a showpiece, but she'd lost her husband in the process. Ryan was in his office with the door closed, claiming he needed to catch up on work emails. Jessica knew he was hiding from her, and for the first time she understood why. She knocked softly on his office door. "Ryan, can we talk?" He looked up from his computer screen, his expression carefully neutral. "What's up?" Jessica took a shaky breath, feeling like she was about to jump off a cliff. "I need to apologize for being disrespectful this week." The words felt foreign in her mouth, but she continued. "I turned back into control mode because I was anxious about my mom's visit, and I completely steamrolled you with demands and criticism." Ryan's fingers stilled on his keyboard. In 12 years of marriage, Jessica had never used the word disrespectful to describe her own behavior. She'd apologized for being stressed, for being overwhelmed, for being emotional, but never for treating him with disrespect. She continued, her voice getting stronger. "I turned our home into a place where you couldn't relax because I was constantly finding things for you to fix or improve. That's not how I want to treat my husband." For a long moment, Ryan didn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I think you didn't even realize you were doing it." Jessica felt tears building behind her eyes. "I didn't, not really. I thought I was just being efficient and organized. I didn't understand that made you feel inadequate and unwelcome." She sat down in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where their relationship had nearly ended just weeks before. Ryan pushed back from his desk and really looked at her for the first time in days. "You're not usually that bad, Jess. This week was just." He trailed off, searching for words. "This week felt like the old days, when everything I did needed improvement. When I couldn't load the dishwasher or arrange the living room or choose a restaurant without getting feedback on better methods." Jessica nodded, accepting the criticism without defending herself. "I know. And I'm sorry. I was so focused on impressing my mother that I forgot about respecting my husband." Something shifted in Ryan's posture, the defensive tension melting from his shoulders. "I appreciate you saying that," he said quietly. "I really do. It's just hard to know if this is going to stick, or if you'll go back to management mode the next time you're stressed." Jessica felt the weight of his words. She'd broken trust with her regression, and trust would need to be rebuilt through consistent actions, not just apologies. "I don't know how to promise I'll never slip up again," Jessica said honestly, "but I can promise I'll keep trying to catch myself when I do. And I can promise that when you tell me I'm being disrespectful, I'll listen instead of defending myself." Ryan's smile reached his eyes. "That would mean everything to me, Jess. Seriously. Taking genuine responsibility cannot be overstated in marriage recovery. Most apologies in struggling relationships are actually disguised blame, beginning with phrases like, "I'm sorry you felt that way," or "I'm sorry, but you have to understand that I was stressed." These apologies actually make things worse because they don't acknowledge wrongdoing. True accountability requires admitting specific harmful behaviors without justifying them or deflecting blame. When Jessica apologized for being disrespectful rather than for being stressed, she took ownership of her choices and their impact on Ryan. This type of apology restores emotional safety because it shows the offending spouse recognizes the problem and takes responsibility for fixing it. Men, in particular, respond powerfully to respect-based apologies because feeling respected is fundamental to their emotional well-being. A few weeks after Jessica's apology, Ryan walked through the front door carrying a bouquet of yellow tulips and wearing an expression Jessica hadn't seen in years. "These are for you," he said simply. Jessica stared at the bright blooms, her throat closing with unexpected emotion. It had been over 2 years since Ryan had brought her flowers for no reason, and she'd forgotten how it felt to be surprised with a gift that wasn't tied to an obligation or special occasion. "They're beautiful," she managed to whisper, accepting the bouquet with hands that trembled slightly. "What's the occasion?" Ryan's smile was soft and genuine. "No occasion. I just saw them at the grocery store and thought of you." The old Jessica might have said something like, "You didn't need to spend money on flowers," or, "They're lovely, but you know I prefer the longer-stemmed ones." Instead, she forced herself to simply say, "Thank you. This makes me feel really special." The words felt awkward and vulnerable, but she watched Ryan's face light up in response. "Good," he said, his voice warm with satisfaction. "That's exactly what I was going for." Learning to receive gracefully proved to be one of Jessica's biggest challenges. When Ryan complimented her new haircut, her instinct was to dismiss it with comments about how much it cost or how it would look terrible in humidity. When he offered to handle the grocery shopping, she wanted to provide detailed lists and specific brand preferences. But she was beginning to understand that her deflections weren't just robbing her of joy, they were robbing Ryan of the pleasure of pleasing her. Men needed to feel successful at making their wives happy, and her constant corrections were stealing that satisfaction from him. The shift began with small experiments in appreciation. When Ryan unloaded the dishwasher without being asked, Jessica resisted the urge to comment on the few items he'd placed in slightly wrong locations. Instead, she said, "Thank you so much. It's a relief to come home to a clean kitchen." Ryan paused in his task, clearly surprised by her response. "Really? It's not a big deal." The changes in Ryan's behavior were gradual. He started initiating small acts of service without prompting. Coffee appeared on Jessica's nightstand in the mornings. He began filling her car with gas when he noticed it was low. One evening, Jessica came home to find he'd assembled the bookshelf they'd purchased weeks ago. "I had some free time," he said when she thanked him. But his pleased expression suggested her appreciation meant more than he was letting on. Jessica's friend Sarah noticed the change during their monthly lunch at their favorite cafe in downtown Denver. "You seem different," Sarah observed, studying Jessica over her salad. "Lighter somehow." "Did you change your skincare routine?" Jessica laughed, realizing she'd been smiling more than usual. "Not my skincare routine exactly, more like my marriage routine." She described some of the changes she'd been making, the focus on appreciation instead of improvement, the practice of letting Ryan handle things his way without interference. Sarah listened with amazement. "So you just stopped giving him suggestions?" Jessica nodded. "It was harder than I expected. I had to physically bite my tongue. But the weird thing is, when I stopped trying to improve him, he started improving things on his own." Sarah shook her head in wonder. "Mike would probably fall over dead if I stopped pointing out better ways to do things." Then came the annual neighborhood barbecue at the Hendersons' house. Jessica had been dreading the event, remembering how tense and disconnected she and Ryan had seemed at last year's gathering. They'd spent the evening on opposite sides of the yard, Jessica gravitating toward other wives to complain about typical husband behaviors while Ryan avoided her by staying glued to the grill with the other men. This year felt completely different from the moment they walked through the gate. Ryan's hand found the small of her back as they navigated through the crowd, something he hadn't done in years. A casual touch that sent warmth spreading through Jessica's chest. As the evening progressed, Jessica found herself genuinely enjoying Ryan's company instead of monitoring his social performance for improvements. When he laughed too loudly at Tom's joke, she felt affection for his genuine enjoyment instead of embarrassment about appropriate volume levels. As they stood together watching the Henderson kids play in the sprinklers, Linda Martinez, who lived 3 houses down, approached them with a warm smile. "You two look so happy together," she said, her voice carrying genuine warmth. "I mean it. There's something different about you guys this year. You seem really connected." Jessica felt heat creep up her neck, but before she could deflect the compliment, Ryan's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her closer against his side. "Thanks, Linda," Ryan said, his voice rich with contentment. "We're in a really good place right now." Jessica looked up at him, seeing an expression of pure satisfaction on his face. When had she last seen Ryan express pride in their marriage to other people? When had he last been willing to publicly claim their happiness instead of just surviving their conflicts? As they walked home later, Jessica reflected on how different the night had felt. "Did you have a good time?" Ryan asked, swinging their joined hands between them. "I did," Jessica replied, and meant it completely. "We actually stayed together most of the night instead of splitting up into separate conversations." Ryan squeezed her hand. "Yes, I wanted to be near you. That hasn't been true for a while." The psychology behind graceful receiving is more complex than it appears. When a woman consistently deflects compliments, minimizes gifts, or redirects appreciation, she sends a message that she doesn't value her partner's efforts. This creates a negative feedback loop where the man stops trying because his attempts aren't being received with joy. However, when a woman learns to accept gifts, compliments, and gestures with genuine gratitude, she reinforces her partner's desire to continue pleasing her. Men are motivated by success, and feeling successful at making their wives happy is one of the most powerful motivators in marriage. Appreciation works like emotional fuel, energizing continued positive behavior. The more appreciated he felt, the more he became to find new ways to make her happy, creating an upward spiral of positive interaction that rebuilt their emotional connection. 6 months later, Jessica sat across from her client Monica Chen, watching tears of frustration stream down the younger woman's face as she described another week of fighting with her husband about household responsibilities. "I just don't understand why he can't see that I'm drowning," Monica sobbed into her tissue. "I work full-time just like he does, but somehow I'm responsible for remembering everything, managing everything, fixing everything." Jessica nodded with genuine empathy, remembering how exhausting that constant mental load had felt. As Monica continued venting about her husband's apparent incompetence, Jessica found herself thinking about how different her own marriage had become. "Monica, can I ask you something?" Jessica said gently. "When your husband does help with something, how do you typically respond?" Monica looked confused by the question. "What do you mean?" "I say thank you, obviously, but then I usually have to fix whatever he did wrong anyway." Jessica felt a familiar pang of recognition. What if you didn't fix it? What if you just said thank you and left it alone, even if it wasn't done exactly how you would have done it? Monica's expression shifted to something between horror and disbelief. But then things wouldn't be done correctly. As their session ended, Monica gathered her purse and coat with the slow movements of someone emotionally drained. "Dr. Coleman, I have to say, you and your husband always seem so happy when I see you in the waiting room. I want what you have. How do you make it look so effortless?" Jessica felt a flush of warmth at the unexpected compliment. 6 months ago, the idea that anyone would envy her marriage would have been laughable. "It's not effortless," Jessica said honestly, "but we've learned some things about how to treat each other that have made a huge difference." 2 months later, Ryan was unexpectedly laid off from his engineering position. The company had lost a major contract, and Ryan came home on a Tuesday afternoon with the shell-shocked expression of someone whose identity had just been scrambled. The old Jessica would have immediately launched into management mode, pulling up job search websites, critiquing his resume, and outlining a systematic approach to networking and applications. Instead, she listened as he processed the shock and disappointment, resisting every urge to fix or solve or manage. "I'm sorry this happened," she said simply, wrapping her arms around him. "This has to feel awful." Ryan leaned into her embrace, and she felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "It does. I knew layoffs were coming, but I thought I was safe because of the Morrison project." Jessica bit her tongue against suggesting he should have seen the signs or prepared better. "What do you need from me right now?" she asked instead. Ryan pulled back to look at her. "I don't know. I guess I just need to process this before I start thinking about next steps." The weeks that followed tested every new pattern they'd established. Money became tight, requiring careful budgeting and difficult conversations about postponing plans. Jessica felt the familiar urge to take control, to create spreadsheets and timelines and action plans that would efficiently solve their problem. But she'd learned that efficiency wasn't always the most important thing in a marriage. When Ryan decided to take a few days to consider his options before jumping into the job search, Jessica supported his timeline instead of pushing for immediate action. When he chose to apply for positions that seemed like lateral moves instead of the promotions she thought he should pursue, she kept her opinions to herself. Then Ryan landed a position with a smaller company that offered him more autonomy and creative control, even though the salary was slightly lower than his previous job. "I know the money isn't as good," he said as they celebrated with takeout Chinese food on their living room floor. "But I think I'll be happier there, and that has to count for something." Jessica felt a surge of pride in his decision-making process. "I think you made a great choice," she said, meaning it completely. "You know your industry and what kind of environment you work best in. I trust your judgment." Their new communication style had emerged naturally from months of practice. Instead of building resentment over small irritations until they exploded into major fights, Jessica had learned to address issues while they were still manageable. When Ryan left his coffee cup on the bathroom counter for 3 days straight, instead of letting it fester into evidence of his general inconsideration, she simply said, "I'd love it if we could keep the bathroom surfaces clear. No lecture about proper cup placement or reminders about previous conversations. Just a simple expression of preference that Ryan could easily accommodate." Jessica's commitment to self-care had transformed more than just her marriage. She'd started taking pottery classes on Thursday evenings, something she'd wanted to do for years but had always dismissed as frivolous. She'd begun reading fiction again, allowing herself to get lost in novels instead of only consuming self-help books and professional journals. On Saturday mornings, she took long walks through the neighborhood with no destination in mind, just enjoying the movement and fresh air. These small acts of personal nurturing had an unexpected effect on her relationship with Ryan. When she came home from pottery class with clay under her fingernails and stories about her classmates, Ryan lit up with interest. When she curled up with a novel on Sunday afternoons, he'd bring her tea without being asked and settle nearby with his own book. The romantic gestures had returned gradually, as if Ryan was testing the waters to see if his efforts would be welcomed. First came occasional flowers, then surprise coffee deliveries to her office, then handwritten notes tucked into her car's visor. Jessica learned to receive each gesture with genuine delight, watching Ryan's confidence grow with each positive response. The man who had once avoided physical affection began reaching for her hand during movies, kissing her goodbye in the morning, and pulling her close while they cooked dinner together. The weekend getaway surprise came in late October. Jessica arrived home from work to find Ryan loading a suitcase into their car, his expression mixing excitement with nervous anticipation. "Pack something comfortable for walking and something nice for dinner," he said, his eyes bright. "We're going away for the weekend." Jessica felt her heart skip with the same flutter she'd experienced during their early dating days. "Where are we going?" Ryan grinned, looking younger than he had in years. "It's a surprise, but I think you're going to love it." The mountain cabin he'd rented overlooked a lake that reflected the autumn colors like a mirror. As they sat on the deck that evening, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Ryan reached for her hand. "You know what I realized?" he said, his voice soft with emotion. "You've become the woman I fell in love with again, but even better. You're still smart and accomplished and amazing, but you're also fun and relaxed and happy. I'd forgotten how much I love making you laugh." Jessica felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than sadness. "I'd forgotten who I was for a while there," she admitted. I got so focused on being perfect and having everything under control that I lost track of how to just enjoy my life and how to enjoy you." Ryan squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I'm glad we found our way back to each other. I missed us." The long-term benefits of practicing respect and appreciation in marriage extend far beyond temporary conflict resolution. Jessica's transformation from critical manager to appreciative partner allowed Ryan to step into his natural role as protector and provider. His increased confidence and initiative, in turn, made Jessica feel more feminine and cherished, which motivated her to continue showing appreciation and respect. The fundamental difference between male and female emotional needs explains why this dynamic is so powerful. Women primarily need to feel loved and cherished, while men primarily need to feel respected and trusted. When wives focus on showing respect rather than just expressing love, they meet their husband's deepest emotional need, which motivates him to provide the love and cherishing his wife craves. This creates a sustainable cycle of mutual fulfillment that can weather life's inevitable stresses and challenges, transforming marriage from a source of conflict into a source of strength and joy.